The gymnasium at Fort Carson Medical Evaluation Center buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that always preceded mandatory fitness assessments. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the polished floor, reflecting off the medical equipment stations arranged in precise military formation. The air carried the antiseptic smell of disinfectant, mixed with the metallic tang of exercise equipment and the faint hint of fear-induced sweat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant Maya Chen stood in line with 43 other soldiers, all waiting for their turn at the physical readiness evaluation that could determine their future deployments. At 28, she blended seamlessly into the crowd of uniformed personnel. Average height, lean build, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that revealed nothing of the person beneath. Her ACU uniform was crisp, but not obsessively so, her boots clean but showing the wear of someone who actually used them for their intended purpose. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of a soldier who had learned that drawing attention was rarely beneficial. No fidgeting, no nervous chatter with the people around her, just the steady, controlled breathing of someone comfortable with waiting, comfortable with silence, comfortable with being overlooked. The evaluation process was supposed to be routine. Height, weight, blood pressure, reflexes, range of motion tests. Standard medical clearance procedures that every soldier had endured dozens of times. But there was something different about this particular assessment, something that had the medical staff whispering among themselves and double-checking their clipboards more frequently than usual. Word had filtered down through the chain of command that this wasn't just about deployment readiness. The Army was implementing new psychological fitness standards, new trauma screening protocols. Too many soldiers had been coming back from overseas assignments with invisible wounds that traditional evaluations had missed. Now they were looking deeper, probing further, asking questions that made everyone uncomfortable. Maya watched the line move forward with mechanical precision. Each soldier disappeared behind the canvas partitions that had been erected around examination tables, emerging 15 or 20 minutes later with expressions ranging from relieved to frustrated to quietly shaken. The medical personnel moved between stations with practiced efficiency, but there was an underlying tension in their movements that suggested they weren't entirely comfortable with what they were being asked to do. The soldier in front of her, a young private named Jackson, kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his paperwork, and Maya could see the sweat stains forming under his arms despite the cool temperature in the gymnasium. When his name was called, he practically jumped out of his skin. Private Jackson, Station 7, called out a Navy corpsman with a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Jackson moved toward the indicated station like a man walking to his execution. Maya watched him disappear behind the canvas barrier, noting the way his shoulders hunched forward as if he were trying to make himself smaller, invisible. She understood that instinct better than most. The woman next to her, a staff sergeant with Intelligence Corps insignia, leaned over and whispered, "They're asking about scars, injuries, anything that might indicate PTSD or unreported combat trauma. My friend went through this last week at Bragg, said they made her strip down and explain every mark on her body." Maya nodded politely but didn't respond. She had learned long ago that the less she said, the less likely she was to reveal something she didn't intend to share. The intelligence sergeant seemed to interpret her silence as nervousness and continued talking, apparently needing to fill the quiet with words. "Honestly, I think it's an invasion of privacy. We sign up to serve our country, not to have some medical technician catalog our battle scars like we're specimens in a lab. But what choice do we have? Refuse the evaluation, get flagged for non-compliance, submit to it, get flagged for whatever they decide your scars mean." The sound of raised voices from behind one of the examination stations cut through the general murmur of the gymnasium. Maya couldn't make out the specific words, but the tone was unmistakably confrontational. Medical personnel moved quickly toward the disturbance, their faces tight with concern. A few minutes later, Private Jackson emerged from behind the canvas barrier. His face was flushed, his uniform disheveled, and his eyes held the glassy look of someone who had been forced to relive memories he had worked hard to bury. He walked past the waiting line without making eye contact with anyone, his paperwork clutched against his chest like a shield. "Next," called the corpsman, his voice now carrying a harder edge. "Sergeant Chen, Station 7. Maya stepped forward, her movements controlled and deliberate. She handed over her paperwork and medical records to the corpsman, who barely glanced at them before jerking his head toward the examination area. Behind the canvas partition, she found herself in a space that felt more like an interrogation room than a medical facility. The examination table was flanked by 2 medical technicians and a doctor whose nameplate read, Captain Reeves. There was also a woman in civilian clothes with a tablet computer, taking notes with the focused intensity of someone documenting evidence. Maya had seen enough military bureaucracy to recognize a psychological evaluator when she saw one. Captain Reeves was a man in his early 50s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of perpetually tired expression that came from too many years of dealing with damaged soldiers. His white coat was starched and spotless, but his eyes held a weariness that suggested he had seen more human suffering than any medical textbook could prepare someone for. "Sergeant Chen," he said, consulting her file, "you're here for standard deployment readiness evaluation with enhanced psychological screening. This is Dr. Patricia Holbrook from the Army's Behavioral Health Division, and these are Medical Technician Rodriguez and Medical Technician Williams." Maya nodded acknowledgement to each person in turn, her expression neutral and professional. She had perfected the art of appearing cooperative while revealing nothing of substance. "The process is straightforward," Captain Reeves continued. "We'll conduct a standard physical examination, but we're also required to document any injuries, scars, or physical markers that might indicate unreported combat trauma or psychological stress. The Army is taking soldier mental health more seriously these days." Dr. Holbrook looked up from her tablet. She was a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Maya's appearance and demeanor. "Sergeant Chen, I want you to understand that this evaluation is designed to help you. Many soldiers carry invisible wounds from their service, and we're simply trying to ensure that everyone gets the support they need." The words were delivered with practiced sincerity, but Maya detected the underlying calculation. This wasn't about helping anyone. This was about identifying potential liabilities, cataloging damage, creating files that could be used to limit future assignments or justify medical discharges. She had seen this process before from the other side. "I understand, ma'am," Maya replied, her voice steady and professional. "Excellent. Then let's begin with some basic questions about your service history. According to your file, you've completed 3 overseas deployments: Afghanistan in 2018, Iraq in 2019, and Afghanistan again in 2021. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "During any of these deployments, did you experience combat situations that resulted in physical injury?" Maya paused for exactly the right amount of time. Long enough to suggest she was considering the question carefully, but not so long as to appear evasive. "I sustained minor injuries consistent with my assigned duties, all of which were properly documented and treated." Dr. Holbrook made a note on her tablet. "I'm going to need you to be more specific, Sergeant. What kind of injuries? When did they occur? How were they treated?" "Shrapnel wounds from an IED blast outside Kandahar in 2018, treated at the field hospital and documented in my medical records. Second-degree burns on my left arm from a vehicle fire in Mosul 2019, also documented. Various cuts and bruises from normal operations." Captain Reeves was flipping through her medical file, cross-referencing her statements with the official documentation. Maya knew he would find everything exactly as she had described it. The question was whether he would notice what wasn't in the file. "The records confirm what you've told us," he said. "However, we're finding that many soldiers have injuries or trauma that weren't properly documented at the time they occurred. Combat situations don't always allow for immediate medical attention, and sometimes soldiers choose not to report injuries for fear of being pulled from active duty." Maya remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the implication. Medical Technician Rodriguez, a young Hispanic man who looked like he had never been closer to combat than a training exercise, stepped forward with what appeared to be a digital camera. "Sergeant, we're going to need to photograph and document any visible scars or injuries. This is part of the new protocol. I'll need you to remove your uniform top," Captain Reeves added. "We'll start with an examination of your upper body and work our way down." Maya began unbuttoning her ACU top with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Underneath, she wore a standard-issue brown t-shirt that revealed the lean, muscled arms of someone who took physical fitness seriously. Rodriguez immediately began photographing what appeared to be a series of small, circular scars on her left forearm. "These appear to be burn marks," Dr. Holbrook observed, making notes. "Consistent with your reported vehicle fire incident." "Correct," Maya confirmed. Captain Reeves examined the scars more closely, his medical training evident in the way he assessed the tissue damage and healing patterns. "These burns were treated properly, but I'm seeing evidence of additional scarring that doesn't match the pattern of a vehicle fire. Can you explain these other marks?" Maya looked down at her arm as if seeing it for the first time. There were indeed other scars there, smaller and more precise than the burns, arranged in a pattern that suggested they had been inflicted deliberately and systematically. "Training accidents," she said simply. Medical technician Williams, an older woman with graying hair and skeptical eyes, shook her head. "Sergeant, I've been doing this for 20 years. Those aren't training accidents." The room fell silent except for the sound of air conditioning and the distant murmur of voices from other examination stations. Maya met Williams' gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying her assessment. "Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Dr. Holbrook leaned forward. "Sergeant Chen, if you experience torture or deliberate harm during any of your deployments, it's important that we document it properly. There are resources available, support systems designed specifically for soldiers who have endured that kind of trauma." "I'm not sure what you're seeing," Maya replied calmly. "My injuries are all documented in my medical records." Captain Reeves set down her file and looked at her directly. "Sergeant, I'm going to be frank with you. What we're seeing suggests you may have experienced capture and interrogation during one of your deployments. If that's the case, you should have been debriefed and provided with appropriate psychological support. The fact that there's no record of such an incident is concerning." Maya remained silent. She had learned that silence was often more powerful than any explanation she could offer. "I'm going to need you to remove your t-shirt as well," Captain Reeves continued. "We need to complete a full examination." Maya pulled her t-shirt over her head, revealing a sports bra and a torso that told a story no medical file could capture. Her back and shoulders were marked with a complex geography of scars, each one precise and deliberate. Burns, cuts, puncture wounds, all healed, but clearly visible. The medical personnel exchanged glances that Maya couldn't see but could feel. Rodriguez continued photographing, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. Dr. Holbrook had stopped taking notes and was simply staring, her professional composure cracking slightly. Williams moved around to examine Maya's back, her experienced eyes cataloging damage that spoke of systematic torture. "Jesus Christ," Williams whispered, forgetting herself. Captain Reeves moved to examine the scarring more closely. His medical training allowed him to read the story written in damaged tissue. "Sergeant, these injuries, they're consistent with professional interrogation techniques. Electrical burns, precise blade work, pressure point trauma. This isn't combat injury, this is torture." Maya stood perfectly still, neither acknowledging nor denying his assessment. She had learned to dissociate from her body during these kinds of examinations, to become an observer rather than a participant. "There's no record of you being captured or missing in action during any of your deployments," Dr. Holbrook said, her voice strained. "How do you explain these injuries?" "I don't," Maya replied simply. The tension in the small space was becoming palpable. Medical technician Rodriguez had stopped photographing and was looking anywhere except at Maya's scarred body. Williams was shaking her head in frustration, clearly recognizing the signs of a soldier who had been through something that officially never happened. Captain Reeves made a decision. "Sergeant, I'm going to need you to turn around. We need to complete the examination." Maya turned slowly, revealing the full extent of the damage to her back. The scars formed intricate patterns across her shoulder blades and down her spine, some old and faded, others more recent, but it was what they saw between her shoulder blades that made everyone in the room freeze. Partially obscured by scar tissue, but still clearly visible, was a tattoo. Not the kind of decorative ink that soldiers often got during leave, but something else entirely. A Ranger tab, the distinctive black and gold emblem that marked graduates of one of the Army's most challenging leadership schools. But this wasn't just any Ranger tab. Below the standard tab were details that made Captain Reeves step back involuntarily. Numbers and letters that identified not just Ranger qualification, but specific unit assignment. And those numbers corresponded to a unit that Captain Reeves recognized from classified briefings he wasn't supposed to remember. 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. But not just any company within that battalion. The numbers indicated Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, during a specific time period that aligned with classified operations in Afghanistan. Operations that officially never happened, conducted by soldiers who officially were never there. Dr. Holbrook had gone completely silent, her tablet forgotten in her lap. Rodriguez had lowered his camera entirely. Williams was staring at the tattoo with the recognition of someone who had heard whispered stories in NCO clubs about Rangers who disappeared into classified programs and never came back. Captain Reeves found his voice first. "Sergeant Chen, where did you serve with the 3rd Battalion?" Maya's response was quiet but clear. "I have no record of serving with 3rd Battalion, 75th Rangers, sir. But the tattoo, quote, is personal body art that doesn't reflect any official military service or assignment." The room fell silent again. Everyone present understood what they were seeing, but no one understood how to process it officially. Maya Chen, according to her service record, had never been assigned to the Ranger Battalion, had never attended Ranger School, had never been qualified for the kinds of missions that would result in the scars covering her body. But the evidence was literally written on her skin. Evidence of service in a unit that recruited the best soldiers for missions that couldn't be acknowledged. Evidence of operations that were so classified they didn't exist in any official record. Evidence of sacrifice that would never be recognized because recognition would compromise ongoing national security. Captain Reeves closed Maya's medical file and set it aside. The routine evaluation had just become something much more complicated. Something that was above his pay grade and beyond his clearance level. Something that would require phone calls to people whose names didn't appear on any organizational chart. Maya stood perfectly still, waiting for the next instruction. She had been through this before, in different forms, with different people asking different questions. The story was always the same. Officially, she was just another soldier with a clean record and documented injuries from standard deployments. Unofficially, she carried the scars of service that her country would never acknowledge and sacrifice that would never be honored. The examination had revealed more than anyone had expected to find. Now the question was what they were going to do with that information. The silence in the examination room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Captain Reeves found himself staring at documentation that suddenly felt inadequate, like trying to describe the ocean by examining a single drop of water. Maya Chen's official service record painted the picture of a competent but unremarkable soldier. 3 deployments, standard assignments, documented injuries that aligned perfectly with conventional combat operations. Nothing that would suggest Ranger qualification, let alone assignment to one of the most elite units in the Army. Yet the evidence was carved into her flesh in black ink and scar tissue. Dr. Holbrook broke the silence first, her voice carefully controlled. "Sergeant Chen, I need to ask you directly. Have you ever received any form of specialized military training that isn't reflected in your official service record?" Maya's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her eyes. Not fear, not defiance, just a kind of weary recognition that this conversation was heading toward territory she had hoped to avoid. "My training is documented in my service record, ma'am." "That's not what I asked." Captain Reeves intervened before the exchange could escalate. "Dr. Holbrook, perhaps we should complete the medical examination first. Document what we found, then determine the appropriate next steps through proper channels." But Williams, the senior medical technician, was studying the tattoo with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. 20 years of military medical service had taught her to read between the lines, to understand the stories that soldiers couldn't tell directly. She moved closer to examine the details of the Ranger tab, noting elements that weren't immediately obvious to the others. "The dates," she said quietly, "the numbers below the tab, they correspond to deployments that aren't in your official record." Maya turned slightly to look at Williams, acknowledging her observation without confirming it. Williams had earned her respect through professionalism, rather than interrogation tactics. "Afghanistan 2020, Williams continued. "But according to your file, you were stateside that entire year, assigned to training duties at Fort Benning." Rodriguez, who had been quietly photographing throughout the examination, lowered his camera entirely. The young medic was clearly out of his depth, dealing with situations that his training had never prepared him for. Should I continue documenting?" Captain Reeves considered the question carefully. Standard protocol demanded complete documentation of all findings. But they were clearly dealing with something that fell outside standard parameters. Classified operations, off-the-books assignments, soldiers whose real service history was buried so deep it might as well not exist. Continue with the medical documentation, he decided, but be aware that these photographs may need to be handled through special security protocols. Maya remained motionless throughout the exchange, her training evident in the way she controlled her breathing and maintained perfect posture despite being partially undressed and subjected to intense scrutiny. She had learned long ago that the best defense was often no defense at all. Let people see what they were going to see anyway, but never volunteer information that wasn't specifically requested. Dr. Holbrook was typing rapidly on her tablet, documenting observations that would likely trigger multiple security reviews. Sergeant, the scarring patterns on your back suggest prolonged exposure to systematic torture. Based on the healing stages, I'd estimate these injuries occurred over a period of several weeks, possibly months. This isn't consistent with brief capture during conventional operations. Maya finally spoke, her voice steady and professional. Dr. Holbrook, I appreciate your medical assessment. However, I'm not comfortable speculating about injuries that are already documented in my medical file. But they're not documented, Dr. Holbrook pressed, at least not accurately. The burns on your arm from the vehicle fire, yes, but the majority of your scarring isn't mentioned anywhere in your official medical history. Captain Reeves was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. Maya Chen represented a category of soldier that military medicine wasn't equipped to handle. Personnel whose official records were deliberately incomplete, whose real service history was compartmentalized at classification levels that most medical professionals would never see. He had encountered similar cases during his earlier career at Walter Reed Medical Center. Operators who arrived for treatment with injuries that didn't match their supposed deployment history. Soldiers whose psychological profiles suggested trauma far beyond what their official assignments could explain. In every case, he had been instructed to treat the medical issues and avoid asking questions that might compromise ongoing operations. But this was different. Maya wasn't arriving for emergency treatment. She was undergoing a routine evaluation that had accidentally uncovered evidence of service that was supposed to remain hidden. The medical examination had become an inadvertent security breach. Williams stepped back from the examination table, her professional assessment complete. Captain, based on what I'm seeing, this soldier has experienced extended captivity and interrogation. The scarring patterns are consistent with torture techniques used by insurgent groups in Afghanistan and Iraq, but the precision and methodology suggest she was held by someone with significant expertise. Quote, Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Williams was reading the story written on her body with uncomfortable accuracy, piecing together details that Maya had hoped would remain buried beneath medical jargon and official documentation. Furthermore, Williams continued, the healing patterns suggest she received immediate and expert medical care following her release or rescue. This isn't battlefield medicine or field hospital treatment. Someone with advanced surgical skills worked on these injuries, probably under controlled conditions with access to proper equipment. Rodriguez was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Ma'am, should I be hearing this? I mean, if this is classified information. Dr. Holbrook looked up from her tablet. That's an excellent question, Rodriguez. Captain Reeves, what's our protocol for handling potentially classified medical information? Captain Reeves had been dreading that question. Standard military medical protocol required complete documentation and reporting through normal channels. But if Maya Chen's service history was classified, then documenting her injuries could compromise ongoing operations or reveal information that was supposed to remain compartmentalized. We document our medical findings according to standard protocol, he said carefully. But we also need to notify the base security office that we may have encountered information requiring special handling. Maya spoke for the first time in several minutes. Captain, if I may, the Army has procedures for handling medical examinations of personnel with specialized backgrounds. Perhaps those procedures should be followed. It was the first time she had acknowledged that her background might be anything other than standard. Not a direct admission, but a subtle indication that she understood the complexity of the situation and was suggesting a way forward that wouldn't compromise anyone involved. Captain Reeves nodded slowly. He was familiar with the procedures Maya was referencing. though he had hoped never to encounter them in his current assignment. Special protocols for medical examination of personnel whose service history was compartmentalized. Procedures that required immediate notification of intelligence personnel and often resulted in the medical examination being suspended pending security review. Dr. Holbrook, I'm going to need you to pause your psychological evaluation. Rodriguez Williams, I need both of you to understand that everything you've seen and heard in this examination is now subject to security protocols. No discussion of these findings with anyone outside this room until further notice. Williams nodded understanding. She had worked with classified personnel before and knew the drill. Rodriguez looked confused but nodded anyway, clearly understanding that he was in over his head. Dr. Holbrook was less accepting. Captain, I have a responsibility to complete my psychological evaluation. If this soldier has experienced significant trauma, she needs appropriate mental health support. And she'll receive it, Captain Reeves assured her, but through the proper channels, with evaluators who have appropriate security clearances. Maya remained silent throughout the exchange, but her posture suggested relief. She had been dreading the psychological evaluation more than the physical examination. Physical scars could be documented and filed away. Psychological scars required discussion, analysis, the kind of probing questions that could inadvertently reveal operational details that were supposed to remain classified. Captain Reeves made his decision. Sergeant Chen, you can get dressed. We're suspending this examination pending a security review. You'll be notified when and where to report for continuation of the evaluation process. Maya began putting her t-shirt back on with the same methodical precision she had used to remove it. No hurry, no sign of relief. Just the mechanical efficiency of someone accustomed to following orders without revealing emotion. As she buttoned her ACU top, Captain Reeves was already reaching for his phone to make the call that would set in motion a series of events none of them could control. Base security would need to be notified. Intelligence personnel would need to be briefed. Maya's chain of command would need to be informed that one of their soldiers had accidentally revealed information that was supposed to remain hidden. Williams began cleaning up the examination area, disposing of medical supplies and organizing the photographs that Rodriguez had taken. Each image would need to be classified and handled according to special protocols. The routine medical evaluation had generated documentation that was now a potential security concern. Dr. Holbrook was still typing on her tablet, completing her notes on an evaluation that had raised more questions than it had answered. Maya Chen presented as a psychologically stable individual who had clearly experienced significant trauma, but without being able to discuss the source of that trauma, it was impossible to provide appropriate mental health recommendations. Rodriguez was packing up his camera equipment with obvious relief that the examination was over. The young medic had signed up to provide medical support to soldiers, not to stumble into classified operations and security protocols that were beyond his understanding. Maya finished dressing and stood at attention, waiting for dismissal. Her expression had returned to the neutral professionalism she had maintained throughout her time in the Army. Whatever emotions the examination had stirred up were carefully controlled and hidden beneath the surface. Captain Reeves looked at her file one more time, knowing that it represented only a fraction of her real story. Maya Chen, according to official records, was a competent soldier with a clean record and standard deployment history. But the evidence written on her body told of service that would never be acknowledged, sacrifice that would never be honored, and trauma that would never be fully understood by the people tasked with providing her medical care. Sergeant Chen, he said formally, you're dismissed. Report to your unit and inform your chain of command that your medical evaluation has been suspended pending security review. You'll receive further instructions through your normal channels. Maya saluted crisply. Yes, sir. She turned and walked out of the examination area, leaving behind a room full of medical personnel who were struggling to process what they had discovered. Each of them understood that they had accidentally glimpsed into a world of military operations that most people never knew existed. A world where soldiers like Maya Chen served in units that didn't officially exist, conducted missions that were never acknowledged, and carried scars from service that their country could never publicly honor. Captain Reeves watched her go, then picked up his phone to make the call that would transform a routine medical evaluation into a security incident. As he dialed the number for base intelligence, he wondered how many other soldiers like Maya Chen were serving quietly in conventional units, carrying the invisible weight of classified service that no one was allowed to discuss. The examination was over, but the questions it had raised were just beginning. Major Kyle Brennan received the call from Fort Carson Medical Center at 1,347 hours while reviewing deployment schedules in his office at the 4th Infantry Division headquarters. The voice on the other end belonged to Captain Reeves, speaking in the careful, measured tone that military personnel used when discussing matters that might be above their security clearance. "Major, we have a situation with one of your personnel, Sergeant Maya Chen. During a routine medical evaluation, we discovered evidence suggesting she may have undisclosed specialized training or classified service history." Brennan set down his coffee and pulled up Maya's file on his computer. Clean record, standard deployments, no red flags. Exactly the kind of soldier who kept her head down, did her job, and never caused problems for her superiors. "What kind of evidence, Captain?" "Scarring patterns consistent with extended captivity and interrogation, torture marks, and a tattoo indicating Ranger qualification and assignment to 3rd Battalion, 75th Regiment, but there's no record of her attending Ranger School or serving with the Ranger Battalion." Brennan's blood ran cold. He had been hoping this day would never come, but every commander who worked with personnel from classified programs knew it was always a possibility. Soldiers whose real service history was compartmentalized sometimes slipped through cracks in the system. Official records that didn't match reality. Questions that couldn't be answered without compromising ongoing operations. "I understand, Captain. We'll handle this through appropriate channels. In the meantime, I need complete operational security on this matter. No discussion, no documentation beyond what you've already generated." "Already implemented, sir. But Major, this soldier may need psychological support. The trauma indicators are significant." Brennan understood the medical concern, but he also understood the bigger picture. "She'll receive appropriate care, Captain, through the proper channels." After ending the call, Brennan sat in his office staring at Maya Chen's file and considering his options. None of them were good. Maya was currently assigned to his logistics company, performing routine supply and maintenance duties that utilized her mechanical skills without drawing attention to her background. It was the kind of assignment that worked perfectly for soldiers who needed to maintain low profiles while remaining on active duty. But now her cover was blown, at least partially. Medical personnel had documented evidence that would raise questions she couldn't answer without revealing information that was supposed to remain classified. The routine evaluation had become a security incident that required immediate damage control. Brennan picked up his secure phone and dialed a number that didn't appear on any official directory. The call was answered on the second ring by a voice he recognized. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Davidson, Joint Special Operations Command. How can I help you, Major?" "Ma'am, we have a potential security issue involving one of my personnel, Sergeant Maya Chen. I believe she may fall under your operational purview." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Davidson was clearly accessing classified databases, cross-referencing the name against personnel records that existed in parallel to the official military system. "Major Brennan, I'm going to need you to provide your clearance verification code before we can continue this conversation." Brennan recited the alphanumeric sequence that identified him as an officer cleared to handle certain categories of classified personnel. It was a clearance level he had never wanted and had hoped never to use. "Confirmed," Davidson said. "Major, Sergeant Chen is currently in a transitional assignment pending completion of a specialized program. Her presence in your unit is temporary and part of a planned reintegration process. What specific security concern has arisen?" Brennan explained the medical evaluation incident, the documented evidence of specialized training and torture survival, and the questions that medical personnel were now asking about discrepancies in her official record. Davidson listened without interruption, but Brennan could hear her typing rapidly on a keyboard. "Major, this is exactly the kind of incident we work to prevent. Has the medical documentation been secured?" "Yes, ma'am, but the personnel involved have questions that they're going to expect answers to. Dr. Holbrook in particular seems determined to provide psychological support." "Dr. Patricia Holbrook, Army Behavioral Health Division. I'm familiar with her work. She's competent but persistent. This complicates matters significantly." Davidson paused, clearly considering multiple factors that Brennan wasn't cleared to know about. "Major, I'm dispatching a team to handle this situation. In the meantime, Sergeant Chen is to report to your office immediately. No further medical evaluations, no psychological assessments, no discussions of her service history with anyone lacking appropriate clearances. Understood, ma'am. But what about her chain of command? My company's sergeant major is going to have questions about why one of his soldiers is suddenly being handled through special channels. First Sergeant Marcus Webb, 25 years of service, Iraq and Afghanistan veteran. He can be briefed on a need-to-know basis. But Major, understand that this situation has the potential to compromise ongoing operations if it isn't handled properly. Brennan felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had signed up to command soldiers, not to manage security incidents involving classified programs he barely understood. Ma'am, what exactly is Sergeant Chen's real background? That information is compartmentalized above your clearance level, Major. What you need to know is that she served with distinction in programs that officially don't exist, and her current assignment is part of a careful transition process. The medical incident has disrupted that process. After ending the call with Davidson, Brennan summoned his first sergeant to discuss a situation that would require careful handling. First Sergeant Webb was a career infantry soldier who had earned his rank through competence and leadership rather than politics. If anyone could help navigate the complexities of managing a soldier with a classified background, it would be Webb. Webb knocked on Brennan's office door at precisely 1,500 hours, his uniform immaculate and his bearing reflecting decades of military service. "You wanted to see me, sir." "Close the door, First Sergeant. We need to discuss Sergeant Chen." Webb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "What about her, sir? How well do you know her background?" "Clean soldier, good mechanic, keeps to herself, been with us 8 months, no problems. Why?" Brennan chose his words carefully. "It appears she may have specialized training that isn't reflected in her official record. Special Operations Command is sending personnel to address the situation." Webb was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "Sir, if you're telling me that Chen is some kind of special operations soldier, that would explain a few things." "What kind of things?" "Her mechanical skills, for one. She can diagnose problems with equipment that our best technicians miss. And she has situational awareness that's off the charts. Always knows who's in the motor pool, what vehicles are running, which personnel are where. I thought she was just detail-oriented, but now..." Brennan nodded. "Now you're thinking it might be training." "Sir, with respect, if Sergeant Chen is transitioning out of classified programs, why wasn't I briefed? I'm responsible for the welfare and management of every soldier in this company." It was a fair question that Brennan couldn't fully answer. "First Sergeant, there are aspects of this situation that are compartmentalized above both our clearance levels. What we can do is ensure that Sergeant Chen receives appropriate support while maintaining operational security." Webb's expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with that explanation, but he understood the realities of military bureaucracy. "What do you need from me, sir?" "Chen is being transferred to special handling immediately. I need you to prepare documentation for temporary duty assignment to special projects. No details, just administrative transfer. And if the other soldiers ask questions?" "Standard response. Personnel reassignment based on specialized skills. No elaboration." Webb nodded understanding, but Brennan could see the frustration in his expression. Career non-commissioned officers like Webb built their reputation on taking care of their soldiers. Being excluded from information about one of his personnel would be professionally difficult to accept. "First Sergeant, I know this isn't ideal, but sometimes we have to trust that the system is working even when we can't see all the pieces." "Yes, sir. I'll handle the administrative requirements." After Webb left, Brennan called Maya's current supervisor, Staff Sergeant Jennifer Torres, and instructed her to send Maya to his office immediately. Torres was a competent logistics NCO who had worked well with Maya, but had never pressed for details about her background. The kind of supervisor who focused on job performance rather than personal history. Maya arrived at Brennan's office 15 minutes later, moving with the controlled precision that characterized everything she did. She knocked once, entered when instructed, and stood at attention with perfect military bearing. "Sergeant Chen, close the door and have a seat." Quote. Maya complied, settling into the chair across from Brennan's desk with the alertness of someone accustomed to receiving news that could change everything in an instant. "Sergeant, I understand you had an interesting medical evaluation this morning." Maya's expression remained neutral. "The evaluation was suspended pending security review, sir. I'm aware. I've spoken with Lieutenant Colonel Davidson at JSOC. She's sending personnel to handle the situation. For the first time since entering the office, Maya's composure showed a crack. The mention of Davidson in JSOC clearly meant something to her, though she worked to control her reaction. Sir, I'm not sure what situation you're referring to. Brennan studied her carefully. Maya Chen was demonstrating exactly the kind of disciplined response that would be expected from someone with specialized training. Never volunteer information. Never confirm details that hadn't been explicitly stated. Always maintain plausible deniability. Sergeant, your tattoo was photographed during the medical examination. The Ranger tab with unit identification that doesn't match your official service record. Maya was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating how much she could acknowledge without violating security protocols. Sir, I'm not authorized to discuss certain aspects of my service history. I understand, but the medical documentation has created a situation that requires management. Dr. Holbrook is asking questions about your psychological fitness based on evidence of torture survival. Questions that you can't answer without compromising classified information. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, I'm prepared to handle any psychological evaluation required by the Army. I'm sure you are, but Lieutenant Colonel Davidson is concerned that standard psychological evaluation protocols aren't appropriate for personnel with your background. Brennan leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. Sergeant, I don't know the details of your previous assignments, and I don't need to know, but I do know that you've served with distinction in programs that require extraordinary personal sacrifice. The Army has a responsibility to ensure that transition back to conventional service is handled properly. Maya remained silent, but her posture suggested she was listening carefully to every word. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson will be here tomorrow to address the medical documentation issue and to discuss your continued assignment. In the meantime, you are relieved of regular duties and assigned to special projects reporting directly to me. Yes, sir. Sergeant, one more thing. The medical personnel who conducted your evaluation are asking questions that they can't be allowed to pursue. Dr. Holbrook in particular seems determined to provide psychological support. That creates a security concern. Maya nodded understanding. Sir, Dr. Holbrook is thorough in her approach to soldier welfare. She won't be satisfied with bureaucratic explanations. Which is why Lieutenant Colonel Davidson is bringing specialists who can address her concerns while maintaining appropriate security protocols. Brennan dismissed Maya with instructions to report directly to him until further notice. As she left his office, he couldn't help but wonder what operations she had participated in that required such extensive security measures. Rangers were elite soldiers, but the level of classification surrounding Maya's service suggested involvement in programs that went far beyond conventional special operations. The routine medical evaluation had exposed a carefully constructed cover that was designed to allow highly trained soldiers to serve in conventional units while maintaining their skills and psychological stability. Maya Chen represented a significant investment in training and experience that the Army couldn't afford to lose, but her real capabilities had to remain hidden to protect ongoing operations. Major Brennan was beginning to understand that managing soldiers with classified backgrounds required balancing multiple competing interests. The medical staff wanted to provide appropriate care, the chain of command needed to maintain unit integrity, and the intelligence community required operational security that sometimes conflicted with normal military procedures. Tomorrow would bring Lieutenant Colonel Davidson and specialists who understood how to navigate these competing demands. But tonight, Brennan would spend time reviewing security protocols he had hoped never to implement, preparing for a conversation that would determine whether Maya Chen could continue serving in his unit or would need to disappear back into the classified world she had apparently tried to leave behind. Dr. Patricia Holbrook arrived at her office at 0630 hours, 2 hours before her first scheduled appointment, carrying a travel mug of coffee and a determination to find answers that had kept her awake most of the night. The psychological profile she had begun to construct for Sergeant Maya Chen represented one of the most complex cases she had encountered in 15 years of military mental health practice. The preliminary documentation painted a picture of systematic torture survival, long-term captivity, and trauma recovery that didn't align with any conventional deployment scenario. The precision of the scarring, the The methodical nature of the injuries and the psychological resilience Maya had demonstrated during examination suggested exposure to interrogation techniques that were typically associated with high-value target capture scenarios. But Maya Chen, according to every official record, had never been reported missing in action, never been listed as captured, never received treatment for torture survival. Her medical files contained routine combat injuries, but nothing that approached the severity of what Holbrook had documented the previous day. The contradiction was professionally frustrating and personally troubling. If Maya had survived the kind of extended captivity that her scars suggested, she needed specialized psychological support. Torture survivors required specific therapeutic approaches, ongoing monitoring, and access to resources that most soldiers never needed. But providing that support required acknowledging trauma that officially didn't exist. Holbrook had spent years working with soldiers who carried invisible wounds from their service. PTSD, depression, anxiety, survivor's guilt, all conditions that could be treated effectively when properly diagnosed and addressed. But Maya Chen presented a different challenge entirely. How do you provide mental health support for experiences that can't be officially acknowledged? She opened her laptop and began reviewing her notes from the previous day's examination, looking for details she might have missed, clues that could help her understand the full scope of Maya's psychological needs. The tattoo with Ranger identification had been photographed and documented, but Holbrook's focus had been on the surrounding scar tissue that told a story of systematic abuse. The burns were particularly troubling, small, precise, clearly inflicted with heated metal objects over an extended period. The pattern suggested interrogation rather than combat injury, with marks placed strategically to maximize pain without causing life-threatening damage. Someone had spent considerable time and effort hurting Maya Chen in ways designed to break her psychologically while keeping her physically viable. Holbrook's office phone rang at 0745 hours, interrupting her analysis. The caller identified himself as Colonel Robert Hayes from the Army Medical Command's Special Programs Division. Dr. Holbrook, I understand you conducted a psychological evaluation on Sergeant Maya Chen yesterday that was suspended due to security concerns. That's correct, Colonel. The evaluation revealed evidence of significant trauma that requires follow-up assessment and treatment. Dr. Holbrook, I'm calling to inform you that Sergeant Chen's case is being transferred to specialized personnel with appropriate security clearances. Your involvement in her evaluation is concluded. Holbrook felt her professional instincts bristle. Colonel, with respect, this soldier has clear indicators of torture survival and PTSD. She needs immediate psychological support, not bureaucratic shuffling. I understand your concern, Doctor, but there are aspects of Sergeant Chen's background that require specialized handling. Personnel with appropriate clearances will ensure she receives proper care. What aspects? Colonel, I've been treating military personnel for 15 years. I have top-secret clearance and extensive experience with combat trauma. What could possibly require removing her from standard mental health protocols? Colonel Hayes paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. Dr. Holbrook, some soldiers serve in capacities that fall outside conventional parameters. Their psychological support must be provided through channels that can accommodate the classified nature of their service. The evasiveness was infuriating. Holbrook had encountered classified programs before and understood the need for security protocols. But she had never been completely excluded from treating a soldier who clearly needed professional help. Colonel, if Sergeant Chen has served in classified programs, I can obtain appropriate clearances. But removing her from psychological care entirely is medically irresponsible. No one said she's being removed from care, Doctor. She's being transferred to specialists who are already cleared for her background. And when will this transfer occur? Today, personnel are en route to handle the situation. After ending the call, Holbrook sat in her office feeling professionally frustrated and personally concerned for Maya's welfare. The military medical system was designed to provide comprehensive care for all service members, but Maya's case was apparently falling into a bureaucratic gap between conventional medicine and classified operations. She decided to review Maya's preliminary psychological assessment one more time before surrendering the case to unnamed specialists. The initial interview had been brief, but Maya's responses had revealed patterns that concerned her professionally. Maya had answered questions about deployment stress with textbook-appropriate responses, demonstrating familiarity with mental health terminology and therapeutic concepts that suggested previous psychological training. But her affect had been carefully controlled, her emotional responses measured and appropriate rather than spontaneous. Most torture survivors exhibited some degree of hypervigilance, emotional numbing, or dissociative symptoms during initial psychological assessment. Maya had shown none of these indicators, maintaining perfect composure throughout an examination that should have triggered at least some trauma response. Either Maya Chen had received extensive psychological conditioning that enabled her to control trauma responses, or she possessed natural resilience that bordered on the superhuman. Both possibilities raised questions about her background that conventional psychology wasn't equipped to address. Holbrook's analysis was interrupted by her assistant's voice over the intercom. "Dr. Holbrook, there are 3 individuals here to see you. They say it's regarding the Chen case. Send them in." The 3 people who entered her office were clearly not typical military medical personnel. The lead figure was a woman in her early 40s wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite disguise her military bearing. Behind her were 2 men in Army uniforms with rank insignia that Holbrook didn't immediately recognize. "Dr. Holbrook, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Davidson, Joint Special Operations Command. These are Chief Warrant Officer Kim and Master Sergeant Rodriguez from our Psychological Operations Support Unit." Davidson's credentials immediately explained the unusual nature of Maya's case. JSOC handled the military's most sensitive special operations, and their psychological support units dealt with personnel whose mental health needs fell outside conventional parameters. "Colonel Davidson, I assume you're here about Sergeant Chen." "That's correct. We're here to assume responsibility for her psychological evaluation and ongoing mental health support." Holbrook gestured for them to sit, but Davidson remained standing, clearly intending to keep the meeting brief and professional. "Doctor, I need to understand exactly what you discovered during yesterday's examination and what documentation you've generated." Holbrook consulted her notes. Extensive scarring consistent with systematic torture, evidence of prolonged captivity, and psychological indicators suggesting exposure to advanced interrogation techniques. But remarkably, no apparent PTSD symptoms or trauma responses. Chief Warrant Officer Kim spoke for the first time. "Dr. Holbrook, the absence of typical trauma symptoms is significant. It suggests specialized psychological conditioning rather than natural resilience." Conditioning. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, whose uniform bore psychology specialist insignia, explained. "Personnel who serve in certain classified programs receive psychological preparation designed to enhance torture resistance and accelerate recovery. What you're seeing is the result of training, not natural ability." Davidson retrieved a tablet from her briefcase and showed Holbrook a series of documents that had been heavily redacted. "Dr. Holbrook, these are psychological profiles from personnel who have completed similar programs. Notice the similarities to what you observed in Sergeant Chen." The documents revealed patterns that Holbrook had never encountered in conventional military psychology. Soldiers who demonstrated exceptional emotional control, enhanced stress tolerance, and accelerated recovery from traumatic experiences. But the documents also showed that these enhanced capabilities came with unique psychological support requirements. "Colonel, if Sergeant Chen has received this kind of psychological conditioning, what does that tell us about her service history?" Davidson closed the tablet. "It tells us that she served in programs that required extraordinary personal sacrifice, and that her transition back to conventional service must be handled carefully." "What kind of programs?" "Programs that officially don't exist, Doctor, which is why her psychological support must be provided through specialized channels." Holbrook was beginning to understand the complexity of Maya's situation. If she had indeed served in classified special operations programs, her psychological needs would be fundamentally different from conventional soldiers. Standard therapy protocols might not be appropriate, and conventional mental health assessments might miss critical indicators. "Colonel Davidson, I'm willing to work within appropriate security protocols. My primary concern is ensuring that Sergeant Chen receives proper psychological support." "That's exactly what we intend to provide, Doctor, but it requires personnel who understand the specific psychological challenges associated with classified service." Chief Warrant Officer Kim opened a folder containing additional documentation. "Dr. Holbrook, we've reviewed your preliminary assessment. Your observations about torture survival and trauma resilience are accurate, but incomplete. What you documented represents only a fraction of Sergeant Chen's actual experiences. What do you mean? Master Sergeant Rodriguez explained. Personnel who survive the kind of captivity that Sergeant Chen endured typically require years of specialized therapy. The fact that she's functioning at her current level suggests either remarkable natural resilience or extensive post-incident psychological support that isn't reflected in her official medical records. Davidson nodded agreement. Which brings us to the central issue, Doctor. Sergeant Chen's official service record is deliberately incomplete. Her real psychological history is classified at levels that require specialized handling. Holbrook felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. You're telling me that she's already received extensive psychological treatment for experiences that can't be officially acknowledged. That's correct. But the medical examination yesterday created a situation where those experiences are now documented in official medical records. That creates both a security concern and a psychological care challenge. Davidson pulled out a chair and sat down for the first time since entering the office. Dr. Holbrook, I'm going to be direct with you. Sergeant Chen represents a significant investment in training and experience that the military can't afford to lose. But her psychological stability depends on maintaining carefully constructed boundaries between her classified service and her current assignment. And the medical documentation threatens those boundaries. Exactly. Which is why we need to implement damage control measures while ensuring that she continues to receive appropriate psychological support. Kim consulted his notes. Doctor, based on your preliminary assessment, do you believe Sergeant Chen poses any risk to herself or others? Holbrook considered the question carefully. No immediate risk. She demonstrated remarkable emotional control and appears to be functioning well within normal parameters. But torture survivors can experience delayed psychological reactions, and the stress of having her background exposed could trigger responses that haven't manifested yet. Rodriguez nodded, which is exactly why we need to provide specialized support during this transition period. Davidson stood, indicating that the meeting was concluding. Dr. Holbrook, we're implementing a protocol that will address both the security concerns and Sergeant Chen's psychological needs. She'll be transferred to a specialized program that can provide appropriate support while maintaining operational security. What does that mean for her current assignment? She'll be reassigned to duties that are compatible with her background while receiving ongoing psychological monitoring from personnel who understand her unique situation. After the JSOC team left, Holbrook sat in her office considering the implications of what she had learned. Maya Chen was apparently a soldier whose real service history was so classified that even acknowledging it created security concerns. The psychological conditioning she had received suggested participation in programs that pushed human resilience to extraordinary limits. But she was also a person who had clearly endured significant trauma and might need ongoing support to maintain the psychological stability that allowed her to function in conventional military settings. The challenge was providing that support through channels that most military medical personnel would never see or understand. Holbrook began preparing her final report on the Chen case, knowing that it would be reviewed by people with security clearances she would never possess. Her recommendations would focus on the psychological indicators she had observed and the long-term support requirements for soldiers transitioning from classified programs. The case had revealed aspects of military service that she had never fully understood. Programs that required soldiers to endure experiences that would break most people, conditioning that enabled them to survive and recover from trauma that would disable conventional personnel, and support systems that operated parallel to standard military medicine. Maya Chen was apparently one of those soldiers, carrying scars from service that her country could never publicly acknowledge. The medical examination had accidentally exposed carefully constructed boundaries that protected both operational security and psychological stability. Now specialists from JSOC would implement measures to restore those boundaries while ensuring that Maya received the support she needed to continue serving. It was a complex balance between competing requirements that Holbrook was only beginning to understand. But one thing was clear. Maya Chen was not the conventional soldier that her official record suggested. She was something much more complex, much more capable, and much more fragile than standard military psychology was equipped to handle. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson's secure phone buzzed at 0830 hours, with an incoming call that would change everything. The voice belonged to General Patricia Manning, commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, speaking from a location that officially didn't exist. Sarah, we have a problem with the Chen situation. Intelligence just intercepted communications, suggesting her cover identity has been compromised beyond the medical incident. Davidson felt her stomach drop. Maya Chen's carefully constructed transition back to conventional service had been designed to last at least 2 more years. If hostile intelligence services had identified her real background, the implications extended far beyond one soldier's career. Ma'am, what kind of communication? Foreign intelligence chatter referencing a female operator matching Chen's description and mission profile. They're calling her the Phoenix. Apparently that was her operational call sign during the Kandahar extraction. Davidson closed her eyes. The Kandahar extraction was one of those missions that existed only in the deepest classified archives. A joint CIA Special Operations rescue of 3 captured intelligence assets from a Taliban compound. The mission had been successful, but it had cost the lives of 2 Rangers and left the surviving operator, Maya Chen, as the sole witness to interrogation techniques that revealed significant intelligence about enemy operations. General, if they've identified Phoenix, they know about Operation Silent Thunder. Exactly, which means Chen is now a high-value target for multiple hostile intelligence services. Her transition period is over. We need to bring her back. Davidson understood the implications immediately. Maya would have to disappear from conventional service and return to the classified world she had been trying to leave behind. The medical examination that had seemed like a minor security incident was now a trigger event that would reshape her entire future. Ma'am, what's our timeline? Immediate extraction. We have assets en route to Fort Carson now. Chen will be debriefed, relocated, and assigned to a new classified program within 72 hours. The call ended, leaving Davidson with the task of implementing an extraction protocol that would erase Maya Chen from conventional military service as if she had never existed. It was a process she had overseen before, but never under circumstances where the subject had specifically requested transition back to normal military life. At 0915 hours, Maya received a text message containing a simple alphanumeric code that made her blood run cold. The code meant immediate extraction. No questions, no delays, no goodbyes. She was sitting in Major Brennan's office completing administrative paperwork when the message arrived. Maya stood up calmly, gathered her papers, and handed them to Major Brennan. "Sir, I need to report to the main gate immediately." Brennan looked confused. "Sergeant, we're in the middle of processing your security transfer." "The transfer has been superseded, sir. Thank you for your support during my assignment with your unit." She saluted crisply and walked out of his office, leaving Brennan staring at paperwork that would never be completed. Maya moved through the headquarters building with the controlled urgency of someone executing a plan they had rehearsed many times but hoped never to implement. 20 minutes later, a black SUV with government plates pulled up to Fort Carson's main gate. Maya approached the vehicle carrying only a small backpack containing personal items that revealed nothing about her real background. She had learned long ago to travel light and leave no traces. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson was waiting in the passenger seat. As Maya climbed into the back, Davidson handed her a tablet containing preliminary briefing materials. "Phoenix, your cover identity has been compromised by foreign intelligence services. We're implementing immediate extraction protocols." Maya scrolled through the intelligence reports that detailed communications intercepts and surveillance activities targeting her current location. The medical examination had apparently triggered a chain of events that led to her identification by multiple hostile agencies. "How deep is the compromise?" Maya asked. "Deep enough that remaining in conventional service isn't viable. You're being reassigned to Program Cerberus, effective immediately." Maya knew about Cerberus, a classified program that provided ongoing assignments for operators whose cover identities had been blown, but whose skills were too valuable to waste. It meant returning to the world of missions that didn't officially exist, operations that couldn't be acknowledged, and service that would never be publicly honored. "Ma'am, I specifically requested a transition out of classified programs." "I understand, Phoenix, but circumstances have changed. Your survival and the security of ongoing operations now require different measures." Dr. Holbrook received notification of Maya's transfer at 1130 hours through an email that contained minimal information and maximum bureaucratic language. "Sergeant Chen has been reassigned to specialized duties effective immediately. All documentation related to her case is to be secured according to security protocols previously outlined." The clinical language couldn't disguise the human reality that Maya had been removed from conventional military service and returned to whatever classified world she had been trying to leave. Holbrook understood that her patient had been sacrificed to requirements that she would never fully understand. But the Chen case had taught her important lessons about the hidden costs of military service. There were soldiers serving in programs that pushed human endurance beyond normal limits, operations that required personal sacrifices that could never be publicly acknowledged, and transition challenges that conventional military medicine wasn't equipped to handle. She began developing new protocols for identifying personnel with classified backgrounds who might need specialized psychological support. If the military was going to continue operating programs like the ones Maya had apparently served in, then medical personnel needed better tools for providing appropriate care while maintaining operational security. Captain Reeves found himself reviewing medical documentation that would be classified and archived in ways that would make it effectively disappear from conventional medical records. The examination that had seemed routine had revealed the existence of military programs that operated parallel to everything he thought he understood about military service. The experience changed his approach to examining soldiers with unusual injury patterns or psychological profiles. He began asking different questions, looking for indicators that might suggest specialized service backgrounds, and developing referral protocols that could connect such personnel with appropriate support resources. Major Brennan spent hours trying to understand what had happened to one of his soldiers. Maya Chen had simply vanished from his unit, leaving behind only administrative paperwork and questions that no one seemed able to answer. Her personnel file was transferred to a classified archive. Her equipment was redistributed to other soldiers, and her assignment was officially listed as administrative transfer to special projects. But Brennan had learned that commanding soldiers sometimes meant accepting that not all service could be visible or acknowledged. Maya represented a category of personnel whose contributions to national security required remaining hidden, whose sacrifices couldn't be publicly honored, and whose welfare depended on systems that operated outside conventional military structures. First Sergeant Webb implemented new procedures for managing soldiers with unusual backgrounds or specialized skills. If the Army was placing personnel with classified histories in conventional units, then NCOs needed better tools for identifying and supporting such soldiers while maintaining appropriate security. 6 months later, Maya Chen officially didn't exist in any conventional military database. Her service record had been archived in classified systems that only a handful of people could access. But her impact on the people who had encountered her at Fort Carson continued to influence how they approached their duties. Dr. Holbrook had developed new screening protocols that were quietly implemented across multiple military medical facilities. Her work on identifying personnel with specialized backgrounds led to the creation of referral networks that connected such soldiers with appropriate psychological support while maintaining operational security. Captain Reeves became a leading advocate for medical protocols that could accommodate personnel transitioning from classified programs. His recommendations influenced policy changes that improved care for soldiers whose service histories couldn't be conventionally documented. Major Brennan was eventually briefed on the broader context of managing personnel with classified backgrounds. He became part of a network of commanders who understood the complexities of supporting soldiers whose real contributions to national security had to remain hidden. The medical examination that had seemed like a routine administrative requirement had accidentally revealed the existence of a parallel military structure that operated according to different rules and served different requirements. Maya Chen had been a representative of that world, a soldier whose real service would never be publicly acknowledged, but whose skills and sacrifice were essential to national security. Her story became a classified case study, used to train personnel who might encounter similar situations. The lessons learned from her accidental exposure influenced policies that better protected soldiers transitioning between classified and conventional service while ensuring they received appropriate support. Maya herself continued serving in ways that couldn't be discussed or acknowledged. Program Cerberus provided ongoing assignments that utilized her unique skills while protecting her from the hostile intelligence services that had compromised her civilian cover. She remained a ghost in the system, officially non-existent but practically essential. The Ranger tab tattoo that had triggered the entire incident was eventually removed and replaced with markings that reflected her new operational identity. But the scars that told the story of her service remained, hidden beneath uniforms that gave no indication of the extraordinary experiences they concealed. Maya Chen had become another invisible soldier in America's hidden wars, serving with distinction in operations that officially never happened, carrying burdens that could never be shared, and protecting freedoms that her fellow citizens would never know were threatened. Her legacy lived on in the improved systems for supporting soldiers like her, personnel whose service required remaining in the shadows, but whose welfare demanded recognition by the people responsible for their care. The medical incident that had seemed like a bureaucratic complication had become a catalyst for better understanding the hidden costs of military service and the extraordinary people who accepted those costs without expectation of recognition. In the end, Maya Chen's story wasn't about the revelation of classified service or the drama of bureaucratic conflict. It was about the quiet heroism of soldiers who serve without acknowledgement, the professionals who work to support them despite systemic limitations, and the ongoing challenge of balancing national security requirements with human welfare needs. The Ranger tab tattoo had been removed, but the commitment it represented remained unchanged. Maya continued serving her country in ways that would never make headlines, performing duties that would never be publicly acknowledged, and carrying scars that told stories that could never be officially told. She was proof that some service requires invisibility, some sacrifices demand a silence, and some soldiers serve most effectively when the world believes they don't exist at all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.